It was just a few days before Christmas, and the air was filled with cheer. Everywhere I looked, I saw people laughing, children playing in the snow, and houses glittering with lights. But in my heart there was a heaviness that refused to lift. My son, the one I had loved and nurtured for decades, had changed. I noticed it slowly over the years, but now it was undeniable. I had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that Christmas would bring us together. I had spent weeks making gifts with care. Not expensive gifts, never that, but heartfelt ones. I had baked cookies, knitted scarves, and even made a small wooden jewelry box for my daughter-in-law. A gift from my heart, hoping it would show her that I still loved my family. The morning of Christmas arrived. I woke early, my hands trembling with excitement as I peeked through the curtains to watch my son and his wife open their presents. My daughter-in-law squealed with delight when she saw a scarf I had knitted, and for a brief moment my heart felt light. But then my son's actions stole the air from my chest. I watched in silence as he handed his mother-in-law a large, perfectly wrapped box with a shimmering green bow. Her eyes widened with excitement as she tore it open, revealing a brand new BMW. My breath caught in my throat. A $60,000 car, for her and for me. Only a small piggy bank, inside of which were $4 measly. $4. I forced a smile, hiding the sting that pricked my heart. I felt invisible, like the years I had devoted to raising him had been forgotten. I smiled, nodded, and quietly took my gift, the tiny piggy bank, and left. I walked home through the cold, silent streets, each step heavier than the last. At home, I set the piggy bank on the table. I stared at it, my mind racing with memories. I remembered changing diapers, staying up late when he was sick, teaching him to ride a bike, helping with school projects, and all the Christmas mornings I had prepared for him with love. And now, after all those years, after every sacrifice, this was my reward. $4 and an empty, hollow feeling that gnawed at my soul. I didn't cry at first. I sat in silence, sipping tea, trying to convince myself that it didn't matter, that material gifts weren't proof of love. But the hurt lingered, twisting in my chest. I thought about my son and his wife, laughing in their luxurious living room, oblivious to the pain they had caused me. Then, as the night deepened, a plan began to form in my mind. Not out of spite, not out of anger, but as a way to reclaim my dignity, to show that love and care could never be measured in money. I wouldn't beg for recognition. I wouldn't plead. I would act. And when the time came, they would understand, though perhaps too late. I went to bed that night with a restless heart. The Christmas lights outside my window flickered like tiny stars, mocking me with their beauty. I closed my eyes, holding on to a silent promise. Tomorrow, I would make them feel the weight of their actions in a way they would never forget. The next morning I woke before sunrise. The house was silent, the only sound, the faint ticking of the old clock in the hallway. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the piggy bank with the $4 inside. I felt small, humiliated, and yet a strange determination was stirring in me. All night, I had replayed the scene in my mind, my son's smug smile, the green bow on that BMW, the excitement in his wife's eyes. Every detail burned itself into my memory. And yet, beneath the hurt, there was a quiet rage. Not a blind, screaming rage, but a calm, purposeful one. I realized that I didn't have to be the victim of their arrogance. I thought about the years I had poured into this family, how every Christmas I had stayed up late, making sure stockings were full, making sure that even the smallest detail was perfect. I had sewn clothes when money was tight, baked pies when no one else had the patience, and offered advice even when it was ignored. I had given everything and received almost nothing in return. But I wasn't helpless. I still had my wits, my pride, and my mind, and I would use them. I wouldn't stoop to anger or insults. I wouldn't beg for recognition. I would give them a lesson, a reminder that love, care, and respect could never be replaced by money. I started planning carefully. Every detail mattered. It wasn't enough for them to see that I was hurt. They had to feel it in a way they couldn't ignore. I thought about the kind of gift that would leave an impact, one that spoke louder than any material present. It had to be clever, precise, and emotional, a mirror to their behavior, a reflection of the years they had taken for granted. For hours I worked quietly in my small kitchen, surrounded by the smell of cinnamon and pine from my Christmas decorations. I wrapped things, arranged notes, and prepared an item that was simple yet powerful. Every word I wrote was intentional. every placement carefully planned. This was no act of revenge, it was a statement. A quiet, unyielding reminder that the love of a mother could not be bought, ignored or dismissed. By mid-afternoon, everything was ready. I held the package in my hands, feeling its weight, not just of the gift itself, but of all the emotions, memories, and silent sacrifices it represented. I knew the moment it would be placed on their doorstep, it would pierce through their laughter, through their luxury, and reach the one place they had ignored, their conscience. I left my home, walking with steady steps through the snow-covered streets. The world seemed oblivious to my plan, to the storm of emotions inside me. I could hear children laughing, dogs barking, carols being sung from nearby houses, but I felt detached from it all. I was focused, every breath calculated, every thought honed toward my goal. When I arrived at their doorstep, I paused. The house looked cheerful, lights twinkling, and the faint smell of pine and baked goods drifting through the air. I placed the carefully wrapped gift on the doorstep, leaving a note in my neat handwriting. No signatures, no explanations, just the truth, simple and undeniable. I turned to leave, my heart racing. I didn't wait for a reaction. That wasn't the point. The point was that I had acted, that I had reclaimed a piece of my dignity, that I had reminded them, silently, powerfully, that I existed. As I walked away, I could already imagine the chaos, the surprise, the shock. I didn't need to see it to know it would come. And deep inside, despite the sadness and hurt, I felt a strange warmth. For the first time in a long while, I felt in control. I had made a statement that would echo long after the BMW had been admired, and the piggy bank forgotten. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, listening to the wind whistle through the cracks of my old house. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from anticipation. I knew what was waiting at their door, and I knew it would strike deeper than any words I could ever speak. By morning, the silence was broken. At first, I heard nothing, just the usual stillness of the neighborhood. But then, in the distance, a scream cut through the crisp winter air. A sharp, piercing cry that could only belong to one person, my daughter-in-law. I closed my eyes and let the sound wash over me. It wasn't joy, it wasn't laughter, it was shock, disbelief, maybe even guilt. And for the first time in years, I felt heard, even though I wasn't there to see it. That scream was not just for the gift itself, but for everything unspoken between us, everything they had ignored, dismissed, or taken for granted. I imagined her face when she opened the package, the way her hands would tremble as she read my note, the silence that would fall over the house, heavy and suffocating. My son standing beside her, perhaps pretending not to care. But inside, I knew he would feel it. A mother's truth has a way of cutting through pride. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the snowflakes drift lazily to the ground. The world looked peaceful, but inside their home, I knew there was chaos. Maybe they were arguing. Maybe my son was trying to defend himself. Or maybe, just maybe, they were both sitting in silence, staring at the reminder I had left behind. As I sipped my tea, my mind wandered back to the early years, Christmas mornings, when my son's eyes lit up brighter than any star, when he hugged me tightly after unwrapping gifts I had worked so hard to buy or make. Back then, love was simple. Gratitude was pure. Somewhere along the way, that boy had disappeared, replaced by a man who measured affection in dollar signs and prestige. The scream had told me something important. My message had landed. It had struck its mark. And whether they admitted it or not, they couldn't ignore me anymore. I wasn't invisible. I wasn't disposable. I was still his mother, and no amount of luxury could erase the bond we once shared. Yet as the hours passed, a sadness crept back into my heart. I didn't do this to hurt them. That was never my intention. I only wanted them to understand, to see me not as a burden, not as someone to be tossed aside, but as the woman who had given them everything she had. My life, my years, my love. By evening, my son called. I didn't answer. The phone rang again and again, but I let it go. I wasn't ready to hear excuses or shallow words. Let them sit with their guilt a little longer. Let them feel the weight of the truth before they spoke to me. When the ringing finally stopped, I sat in silence. Outside, the lights on their house still shone brightly, but I knew inside those walls, something had shifted. And though I sat alone in my little home, I didn't feel powerless anymore. For the first time in years, they had no choice but to face me, even if only through the echo of a scream. When I finally put the kettle down and sat quietly, I couldn't help but replay the scene in my mind, my daughter-in-law's scream, sharp and raw, echoing through the winter morning. She had opened the gift. She had seen what I wanted her to see. Inside the box, I hadn't placed gold or jewels. No, my gift was simpler but far heavier. I had given them a small wooden chest, hand-carved with trembling fingers laid into the night. Inside, I had carefully arranged mementos of my son's childhood. A pair of his baby shoes, worn and scuffed from the first steps he ever took. A lock of his hair I had saved from his first haircut, tied neatly with a faded ribbon. The crayon drawing he had made for me in kindergarten, with clumsy words scrawled at the top, "I love you, Mom." And beneath these things, folded carefully, was a note. Not long, not angry, just a simple truth written from the depth of a mother's heart. Once you gave me your whole world in the form of a hug and a smile. Now, you've given me $4. I don't need your wealth, but I do need your love. When you remember who I am, this box will mean more than any BMW. I knew those words would pierce deeper than any lecture. I knew they would see that. The true gift wasn't the things inside that box. It was the reminder of the love we once shared. The love that had been buried under pride and materialism. When my daughter-in-law screamed, I imagined it wasn't just at the sight of the baby shoes or the ribbon. It was at the weight of truth. Maybe she had never realized the history, the bond, the sacrifices that had been made long before she became part of the family. Maybe she had thought love could be measured by price tags and brands. But that box told another story. I didn't regret what I had done. No, in fact, for the first time in a long while, I felt a quiet satisfaction. It wasn't revenge, it was a mirror, a way to show them what they had forgotten. A way to say, I am here, I matter, my love is priceless. That evening, I sat by the fireplace, the glow of the flames warming my cold hands. My phone buzzed again and again, my son's number flashing across the screen. I didn't answer. I couldn't, not yet. Let them sit with that box. Let them sit with the weight of the past. The innocence of those memories. Because that was the true gift of Christmas. Not cars, not bows, not dollar signs. But love. Pure, simple, irreplaceable love. And until they understood that, I wasn't ready to listen. The phone calls didn't stop that night. Again and again his name lit up the screen. But I let it ring until the silence returned. I wasn't ready to hear his voice, not when my heart was still raw and aching. I thought he would give up eventually, hide behind his pride as always. But the next morning, just as the frost was melting on the windows, I heard it, 3 firm knocks at my front door. My heart skipped. I knew that sound. I didn't even have to look. I knew it was him. For a moment I froze. Should I answer? Should I let him in? Or should I make him stand out there in the cold? The way I had stood alone in my pain all these years? My hand trembled as I reached for the doorknob. But something inside me whispered, face him. I opened the door slowly. And there he was, my son. The boy I had raised, now a man with weary eyes and a face that looked older than his years. He wasn't smiling this time. He wasn't proud or smug. He just looked small, smaller than I'd ever seen him. Mom, he said softly, his voice breaking on that single word. For a moment I almost didn't recognize it. Gone was the arrogance, the sharp tone I had grown used to. In its place was something fragile, something almost childlike. I didn't invite him in immediately. I just stood there, my hands gripping the doorframe. What is it you want? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. He swallowed hard. The box. The things you put inside. Mom, why didn't you just tell me? I almost laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. Tell you? I've been telling you for years. In every meal I cooked, in every sweater I knitted, in every time I stayed silent instead of fighting. But you never listened. His eyes dropped to the ground. He looked ashamed, like a schoolboy caught doing something wrong. For once, the silence between us wasn't empty. It was heavy, filled with all the unspoken words we had both been carrying. Finally, he whispered. She cried all night. My wife. She said she never realized how much she had taken from you, how much we had taken. That box, it broke something in her. And me too. I stared at him, my chest tightening. Part of me wanted to reach out, to pull him into my arms the way I used to when he was a boy. But another part of me held back. Remembering the piggy bank, the $4, the years of neglect. You gave her a BMW, I said quietly. And you gave me $4. Do you know what that feels like? To raise a son for decades and be worth less than the price of a toy car? Tears welled in his eyes. He opened his mouth, but no words came. For once, my son, the man who always had an answer, always had a defense, was silent. I stepped aside then, slowly, and nodded toward the living room. "Come in," I said. "If you really want to talk, then sit down. But this time you'll listen. You'll listen to every word." And as he stepped inside, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand, I knew the real conversation was only just beginning. He sat down on the old sofa, the one that had seen decades of memories, birthday parties, Christmas mornings, even the night he left for college. Now the same sofa bore his weight again. But this time, he wasn't the confident young man I had once watched step out into the world. He was broken, uncertain, and guilty. I sat across from him, folding my hands in my lap. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The silence pressed heavy between us, and I could almost hear the ticking of the clock echo in my chest. Finally, I broke it. "Do you know what those $4 meant to me?" I asked softly. He looked up, shame flickering in his eyes. "Mom, it wasn't meant to hurt you. It was supposed to be—" "Supposed to be what?" I interrupted. My voice was sharper than I intended, but I didn't pull it back. "A joke? A reminder of how little I matter to you? Because that's exactly what it felt like. A joke at my expense." He swallowed hard, his hands tightening into fists on his knees. "I didn't think. I thought you'd laugh, that you'd see it as something silly. But I see now it was cruel. I wasn't thinking about how you'd feel." I leaned forward, my voice trembling, not with anger, but with years of swallowed hurt. "You never think, son. Not about me. Do you remember how many Christmas mornings I stayed awake all night? Sewing little gifts, baking, making sure you had something to smile about? Do you remember the nights I went without so that you could have new shoes for school? Do you even remember the last time you said thank you?" He lowered his head. His shoulders shook slightly. "I remember, Mom. I lost sight of it. Somewhere between trying to prove myself, trying to build a life, I forgot who helped me get there. I forgot you." The words pierced me. Part of me wanted to scream, to throw all the years of pain back at him. But another part, the mother in me, ached to forgive. I took a deep breath. "I don't need your BMWs or your money or your grand gestures. I never did. All I wanted was respect, to be remembered, to be treated like a mother, not like some charity case you toss scraps to." His eyes filled with tears. He reached out across the small coffee table, his hands trembling. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I don't know how I became this person. When I opened that box and saw my shoes, my drawing, that ribbon, I remembered who I used to be. I remembered your love, and I hated myself for what I've done. For the first time, I saw my son stripped of his pride, his wealth, his defenses. And in that moment, I realized something. The boy I had raised wasn't completely gone. He was buried under years of pride and distance, but he was still there, reaching for me. Slowly, I placed my hands on his. "I don't want your money," I whispered. "I just want my son back." He nodded, tears spilling freely now. "You have him. I swear, Mom, you have him." And for the first time in years, I believed him. The following evening, just as the sun dipped below the horizon and painted the sky with shades of purple and gold, there was another knock at my door. Softer this time, hesitant. I knew it wasn't my son. He never knocked like that. When I opened the door, there she stood, my daughter-in-law. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hands clutching her coat tightly. Around her, as though the cold air had seeped into her bones. For the first time since I had known her, she looked vulnerable. "May I come in?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, stepping aside. She entered cautiously, her gaze sweeping over my small, modest living room, the old furniture, the faded curtains, the quiet warmth of a home built not on wealth, but on love and sacrifice. She sat down slowly, her hands trembling. For a while she said nothing. Then with a shaky breath she looked up at me. "I didn't understand," she admitted, tears pooling in her eyes. I thought you didn't care about gifts. I thought you were content with small things, with whatever we gave you. But when I opened that box," she stopped, covering her mouth as a sob broke through. I stayed silent, waiting. When I saw those baby shoes, that ribbon, that drawing, I realized I had taken so much for granted. I never thought about what you had given, what you had sacrificed. I only thought about what you didn't have. I judged you, without ever knowing your story. Her words were raw, unpolished, but they pierced me. I saw the sincerity in her eyes, the shame in her trembling hands. For the first time, she wasn't just my son's wife. She was a woman stripped of her pride, standing before me with nothing but truth. "You were right," she whispered. "Love can't be measured in money. I see that now, and I am so sorry. I don't know if you can ever forgive me." I looked at her, my chest tightening. A part of me had long resented her, believing she had turned my son away from me, that she had built walls where bridges should have stood. But looking at her now, I saw not an enemy, but a woman who had been blind, and now, finally, her eyes were open. Slowly, I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. "Child," I said softly, "I never wanted riches from you. I never wanted cars or diamonds or grand gestures. All I ever wanted was respect, a place in your hearts, a little love." She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. "You have it now. You'll always have it, I promise." For a long moment we sat in silence, two women bound by the same man, yet separated for years by pride and misunderstanding. And in that silence something shifted. The bitterness that had festered between us began to fade, replaced by something fragile but real, understanding. When she finally left that night, she hugged me tightly. It wasn't polite. It wasn't forced. It was the hug of someone who had finally seen me for who I was. And as the door closed behind her, I felt a strange peace settle over me. Maybe, just maybe, the gift I had left on their doorstep had given me more than I ever expected. Not revenge, not guilt, but a chance to heal what had been broken for far too long. A week passed, and the world shifted from Christmas cheer to the quiet anticipation of a new year. The streets were alive with laughter, fireworks being sold on corners, and families preparing for celebrations. For me, the days had been strangely still. After those visits, first my son, then my daughter-in-law, my house felt lighter. Though the silence still echoed with years of memories. On New Year's Eve, just as the first snow of the evening began to fall, there was another knock at my door. But this time it wasn't hesitant or heavy. It was gentle, rhythmic, almost hopeful. When I opened it, I found them both standing there side by side. My son and his wife. In his hands he held no fancy boxes, no bows, no car keys. Just a simple basket filled with food, fruit, and a bottle of wine. She held a bouquet of fresh flowers, white lilies, my favorite. Their eyes met mine, soft, almost pleading. "We were hoping," my son began, "that you would spend New Year's Eve with us." For a moment I just stood there, stunned. After everything, after all the years of feeling forgotten. They were here, reaching out. My heart wanted to leap, but my pride held me still. Could I trust this? Or was it just guilt wrapped in a gesture? Then she spoke, her voice gentle. "It's not about gifts anymore. We want you there. Not because we feel we should, but because we need you there. Your family. And we can't start the year without you." Something in me broke then. Not in pain, but in release. The walls I had built to protect myself began to crumble, brick by brick. I nodded slowly, tears stinging my eyes. "Give me a moment," I whispered, and I went to fetch my coat. Their home glowed warmly when we arrived. The table was set, not with extravagance, but with care. Candles flickered gently, dishes steamed with rich aromas, and for the first time, there was a place set for me, not at the corner, not as an afterthought, but right in the center. As I sat down, I felt an ache in my chest, not from hurt, but from the sudden flood of belonging. My son poured me a glass of wine, his hands steady but his eyes wet. My daughter-in-law placed a plate before me, smiling softly, and whispered, "Thank you for forgiving us enough to be here." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I let the warmth of the moment sink into my bones. For so long I had imagined being invisible, unwanted. But here I was, not forgotten, not dismissed, seen. At midnight, when the clock struck 12 and fireworks lit up the sky outside, I found myself surrounded by something I hadn't felt in years: family. Not perfect, not unbroken, but trying. And that was enough. As I raised my glass, my voice trembled. "To new beginnings," I said softly. And when they clinked their glasses against mine, I knew this new year carried something far more precious than any gift ever could: hope. The laughter that night was soft, cautious, like the first steps of a child learning to walk. We weren't healed completely. Wounds, like ours, don't vanish overnight, but we were trying. And that was something I hadn't dared hope for. After the meal, when the candles had burned low and the dishes were cleared, my son asked me to step outside for a moment. The cold air bit at our cheeks, but the sky was alive with fireworks, bursts of red and gold painting the darkness. He stood beside me, his hands shoved deep into his coat pockets, his face lit by the fleeting sparks above. For a long while he said nothing. Then finally he spoke. "Mom," he began, his voice low, "do you know why I've been the way I am? Why I became so blind?" I glanced at him, my heart tightening. "Tell me." He took a shaky breath. "When I married her, I felt like I had to prove something. That I could give her everything she wanted. Luxury, comfort, a life better than the one I had growing up. I thought if I showered her family with gifts, if I played the role of the successful son-in-law, I'd earn respect. That's what I chased, Mom. Respect. From people who didn't matter." His voice cracked then, and for the first time, I saw the weight he carried, not just arrogance, but fear. Fear of not being enough, fear of being judged. "I thought," he continued, "that giving you something small, like the piggy bank, was harmless. That you'd understand I couldn't show off with you the way I did with them. But I see now, it wasn't harmless. It was cruel. I made you feel less when you were the one who gave me everything." Tears blurred my vision, but I blinked them back. "Son," I whispered, "you don't have to prove yourself to anyone. Least of all me. You've already proven it, through the years you stood tall, through the life you built. But somewhere along the way, you forgot who helped you take your first steps." He lowered his head, his voice trembling. "I was ashamed. Ashamed that I didn't give you more, that I didn't treat you the way you deserved. So I avoided it, avoided you, as if distance would erase the guilt. But it only grew worse. And when I saw that box, those little shoes, that ribbon, that drawing, I realized what I'd lost. I realized how far I'd strayed. A silence hung between us, filled only by the crack of fireworks and the distant laughter of strangers. Then slowly he turned to me. His eyes glistened with tears, his voice breaking. "Mom, can you forgive me? Not just for the gift, for the years, for all of it." I felt the cold seep into my bones, but my heart burned with warmth. Forgiveness, it wasn't easy. The pain had been deep, the scars long. But looking at him now, I saw not just the man he had become, but the boy he once was. The boy who had once drawn me pictures and whispered, "I love you," with innocence in his voice. Slowly I reached out and touched his hand. "I already have," I whispered, "long before you even asked." And as the sky above us exploded in light, I felt something inside me mend. Not completely, not perfectly, but enough to let love back in. The first light of morning spilled softly through my window, brushing the walls with gold. The world seemed quieter, calmer, as if it had waited for the storm inside our family to settle. I sat by the window, a warm cup of tea in my hands, and for the first time in years I felt at peace. The night before had been long, filled with tears, confessions, and laughter. My son had finally admitted the distance he had created, the mistakes he had made, and the years he had taken me for granted. My daughter-in-law had come to understand, truly understand, the depth of a mother's love. And now they were both here, not just physically, but emotionally present, ready to rebuild what had been broken. I thought back to that Christmas morning, the BMW, the piggy bank, the quiet rage and sorrow I had felt. It had been a cruel contrast, a reminder of how little people sometimes see the love around them until it's mirrored, back in a way that cannot be ignored. Yet even that pain had led us here. That tiny box, filled with memories and truth, had done more than I could have imagined. When they came to my house that morning, it was different. No gifts, no grandeur, just us, sitting together, talking, listening. I told them stories from my childhood, from their father's life, from the years before either of them existed, and they listened, not out of obligation, but because they wanted to know me, to understand me. And in return, they shared themselves, not as a facade of wealth or perfection, but as honest, vulnerable people who had made mistakes and were ready to make amends. I realized then that love isn't measured by money, by gestures, or by appearances. It is measured by presence, by attention, by the willingness to be vulnerable and to forgive. And in that small sunlit room, we rebuilt the bonds that had been stretched thin, thread by thread, word by word. We laughed, we cried, we reminisced and planned, not about luxuries, but about moments we would share, memories we would create together. For the first time in a long while, I felt that my life's work, my sacrifices, my love, had not been in vain. As I watched them leave later that afternoon, hands linked, Heads bent together in quiet conversation. I felt a swell of hope. This family, imperfect, flawed, but ours, was ready to face the future with honesty and care. And I knew that no car, no gift, no fleeting material possession could ever replace what we had regained. Understanding, forgiveness, and love. I returned to my chair by the window, the snow outside sparkling like tiny diamonds. I sipped my tea and smiled softly. Life had tested me, hurt me, and challenged me, but it had also reminded me of the power of patience, dignity, and truth. And as the day grew brighter, I whispered to the quiet room, "This is enough. This is all I ever wanted." For the first time in a long time, I felt whole. Thank you so much for watching my story. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to my channel and leave a comment telling me where you're watching from. Your support means the world to me.